Most people think they already understand capitalism's origin story. The image of Adam Smith sitting at a candlelit desk in 18th century Scotland, quill in hand, inventing free markets with a single phrase, the invisible hand. Ask a politician, an economist, a corporate lobbyist, or even a college student in an intro econ class, and they'll all give you the same narrative. Smith believed markets should be left alone, governments should never interfere, and individual greed naturally organizes society. But what if I told you that the entire foundation of that belief, the entire modern mythology of laissez-faire economics, is built on a misquote? What if I told you the world has been using Adam Smith's name to defend ideas he never supported, promote policies he would have condemned, and justify a version of capitalism he spent his entire life warning us about? Welcome to The Financial Historian, where money, myth, and power collide, and where the stories we think we know usually hide the truths no one wants to confront. To understand what Adam Smith actually meant by the invisible hand, you have to go beyond the slogans, beyond the political weaponization, and beyond the cartoon version of Smith that exists today. You have to travel back to 1723 Scotland, a cold, rigid, unequal society where birth mattered more than talent, where markets were not free but tightly controlled by guilds, monopolies, and royal privileges, and where the British Empire's economic engine ran not on competition but on corporate power. The world Smith grew up in was a world dominated by mercantilism, a system where governments granted monopolies to favored companies, where special interests shaped laws, and where global trade routes were controlled not by nations, but by corporations like the East India Company. This was not a free market. This was a rigged marketplace run by a cartel of the powerful. And young Adam Smith watched all of this with the eyes of a philosopher, not an economist. Because before he wrote The Wealth of Nations, Smith wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments, a dense, profound work about empathy, sympathy, justice, and the moral limits of self-interest. Smith believed that economies only work when societies are built on decency. He believed that self-interest must be balanced by moral responsibility. And he believed that without ethical guardrails, markets twist into tools for exploitation. In other words, the real father of economics believed economics begins with morality, not money. But somewhere between Smith's time and ours, something strange happened. Smith's nuanced philosophy collapsed into a slogan. His warnings were stripped away. His complexity was erased. And the invisible hand, a small metaphor that appears only 3 times in all his writings, became a universal doctrine, not because Smith intended it, but because powerful groups needed it. The first use of the invisible hand had nothing to do with markets at all. It appeared in Smith's early essay The History of Astronomy, where he used the phrase to describe ancient superstition, humanity's tendency to blame mysterious forces for natural events. The second use, the famous one, in The Wealth of Nations, described a merchant who invested domestically out of fear, not patriotism, not economic logic, but fear. That accidental benefit, not a natural law, was what Smith called the invisible hand. And the final use, in The Theory of Moral Sentiments, mocked wealthy landowners who hoarded resources but accidentally distributed some because they couldn't physically consume everything. 3 uses: superstition, fear, and gluttony's limits. Not one universal law. Not one argument for deregulation. Not one endorsement of greed. And yet by the late 1800s, industrial giants, Carnegie, Rockefeller, and the emerging monopolists, turned that tiny metaphor into a shield for their growing power, arguing that government oversight was unnecessary because the market will handle it. Conveniently, this interpretation appeared just as these businesses were consolidating industries, crushing competitors, manipulating prices, and influencing political systems. In this era, Adam Smith was transformed into something he never was, a prophet of unregulated capitalism. Later, during the Cold War, this simplified version of Smith became a weapon against communism. Western leaders needed a clean, ideological hero, someone to symbolize the moral superiority of markets. Smith, now stripped of nuance, was elevated into that role. His philosophical warnings, his moral arguments, and his critiques of corporate power were erased. Only one sentence survived, the invisible hand, and even that was taken out of context. The irony is almost poetic. The man who feared monopolies became the mascot for monopoly power. The philosopher who warned that merchants would conspire against the public became the justification for letting merchants write the rules. The thinker who believed markets needed regulation became the poster child for deregulation. To understand how far the mythology diverged from reality, you need to look at what Smith actually wrote. He warned that corporations distort markets by elevating private power over public welfare. He warned that when merchants influence government, society suffers. He warned that monopolies destroy competition. He warned that workers deserve fair wages. He warned that the wealthy must contribute to society proportionally, a clear endorsement of progressive taxation. Smith believed in competition, but he believed it must be protected by rules. He believed in markets, but not without oversight. He believed in trade, but not in imperial exploitation. And above all, Smith believed that economic systems must serve humanity, not the other way around. So how did Smith's belief in moral responsibility get replaced with the idea that greed is good? How did a philosopher who spent half his career warning about corruption become the icon of unrestrained capitalism? It begins with selective reading. In the 20th century, economists like Milton Friedman and the Chicago School elevated the invisible hand into a doctrine. They promoted the idea that markets naturally self-correct, that regulation is unnecessary, that government intervention distorts efficiency, and that individuals acting selfishly create optimal outcomes. But this interpretation depends entirely on ignoring every warning Smith ever gave. It depends on pretending he didn't write hundreds of pages condemning the behavior of large firms. It depends on forgetting that Smith believed humans are moral creatures, not machines maximizing utility. And it depends on pretending that the invisible hand was a law, when in reality, it was a literary metaphor describing rare accidents. This reinterpretation was not an academic mistake. It was an ideological project. It provided a moral justification for deregulation. It offered political cover for corporate expansion. And it gave policymakers an easy slogan: the market knows best. But history proved that the market, left alone, does not know best. The Great Depression, the rampant monopolies of the early 1900s, the S&L crisis, the dot-com bubble, the 2008 collapse. Every major economic crisis occurred not because governments did too much, but because powerful actors operated without oversight, exactly as Smith predicted. Smith warned that the disposition to admire the rich is the great and most universal cause of corruption. And in modern society, that corruption is visible everywhere: in regulatory capture, political lobbying, price fixing, antitrust violations, and the subtle ways corporations shape the rules meant to constrain them. If Adam Smith were alive today, what would he see? He would see tech giants controlling information flows. He would see pharmaceutical conglomerates shaping healthcare policy. He would see financial institutions whose risks threaten entire nations. He would see retail monopolies erasing local competition. And he would not call this a free market. He would call it what it is: a system where private power has grown so large that it behaves like the old monopolies of his own era. He would argue that markets cannot function when one or two players dominate. He would warn that innovation dies when competition disappears. And he would point out that the invisible hand cannot operate when the market is controlled by a handful of institutions too big to fail. The truth is that modern capitalism is not Adam Smith's capitalism. It is a distorted version built on his reputation, but not his ideas. And that distortion matters, because when society believes the market self-regulates, it lets powerful actors escape accountability. When policymakers believe the invisible hand guides outcomes, they stop enforcing rules. When corporations invoke Smith to defend their influence, they rewrite the system in their favor. The true legacy of Adam Smith is not the invisible hand. It is the belief that markets work only when power is checked, when competition is real, and when human morality serves as the foundation of economic life. Smith understood something modern economics often forgets: that markets are human creations, shaped by laws, values, and collective decisions. And if the rules are written by the powerful, the market stops being a market and becomes a stage, where the outcomes feel natural but are actually engineered. Understanding this doesn't make capitalism weaker, it makes it healthier. Smith didn't argue for government control, he argued for government responsibility. He didn't argue for market chaos, he argued for market integrity. And he didn't view the invisible hand as salvation. He viewed it as a curious footnote in a much larger story about human behavior. So the next time someone invokes Adam Smith to defend deregulation, or to argue that markets always know best, or to claim that greed is a natural organizing force, remember what Smith actually believed. He believed that societies succeed when power is balanced. He believed that economies thrive when fairness is upheld. And he believed that the greatest threat to prosperity is the concentration of economic power in the hands of the few. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And in the tale of Adam Smith, the rhyme is loud and clear. Whenever society forgets the moral foundations of economics, the same patterns, the same crises, the same inequalities, the same monopolies return. Understanding Smith as he truly was isn't just about correcting the record. It's about reclaiming the wisdom we abandoned. And if this gave you a new way to think about markets, history, or the stories we tell ourselves, hit subscribe, because the past has answers the present is still searching for, and I'll show you exactly where to look.